Live now to New York for some insight from Caleb Maupin, frequent RT contributor from the International Action Center. Thank you for joining us again here on RT International. What sort of results do you expect from these latest protests?
Well, every year for the last several decades, there have been tremendous national demonstrations on October 22nd about police brutality. And at these demonstrations every year, we hear about the villains, the police officers who murder people. They shoot them 6, 7 times and say, oh, I thought they had a gun, and then they get no penalty after taking someone's life. But this year on October 22nd, what makes it different is that this year not only will we have the villains, but we'll have the heroes. The people of Ferguson, Missouri, after their neighbor, their friend Michael Brown was killed, they could have just continued with their lives. They could have just kept their heads down. But they didn't. They went out in the streets, they took action, and in doing so, they captured the imagination of millions of people all across the United States who are furious about the rising police state, the normalization of police violence and terror all throughout U.S. society. And that is really the hope, that people will take action and will take history into their own hands, pour into the streets, and confront what's this real threat to our society, which is the rising power of police.
Are you happy with what the federal government has done so far to curb excessive use of force by police?
Well, I don't think that the rise of police brutality and violence and killings is really a policy. I think it's about money. We're in an economic situation where the capitalist bankers and billionaires in this country are no longer making profits from hiring people. We don't have factories throughout this country where people are just going and getting paid to do work. Instead, they're making money from locking people in prison, mass incarceration, imprisoning people, jailing people, police everywhere. This is a billion-dollar industry. Bankers and capitalists are making profits from locking people in jail. And as the next generation moves into this low-wage economy, it's becoming very scary. Police are everywhere. You go throughout U.S. society, police are in the schools, police are in the streets, people are searched all the time, being threatened all the time, having guns pointed at them all the time. This is the new reality, and it's really rooted in the global economic crisis. Just like they're looking to drive for war internationally and escalate the threats against countries that dare oppose Wall Street internationally, they're also waging a war against the population and locking society down and forcing us to accept lower wages and a lower standard of living.
Militarization of police has become somewhat of an issue after this unrest in Ferguson. Do you think there's anything or enough being done about that? I mean, certainly people are speaking out about it now, at least.
Well, there absolutely isn't enough being done about it. And part of the reason for that is because I think that the drive for police repression, the escalation of mass incarceration, locking people up, is dependent on a certain strata of society, mainly people who look like me, white people, just kind of going along with it and saying, oh, you know, this is something that has nothing to do with me. What they need to realize is that it's absolutely linked. The economic crisis, which is causing homes to be foreclosed all throughout the Midwest, which is lowering the wages and all of that, that is directly linked to the rise in police brutality and violence. And as long as white people like myself continue to not identify with the protest movement and let the oppressed black nation fight on its own, there isn't any hope. The white workers and black workers need to come together to oppose the rise in police brutality which is going on, which is rapidly escalating all throughout the country. You know, the same police forces that routinely brutalize African American and Latino youth, those same police forces also attacked Occupy Wall Street protesters like myself when we peacefully demonstrated against Wall Street and the financial crisis back in 2011. I mean, this rising police state is a threat to everyone in this country, and it needs to be opposed.
We've seen several cases of police officers, for lack of a better word, gunning down black teenagers, in some cases unarmed. Do you think the officers, why are the officers shooting to kill instead of trying to show perhaps more restraint, using tasers, for example, things like that?
I think it's important to examine, you know, what is the definition of terrorism? Terrorism is an act of violence designed to terrify a population and create fear. And ever since, you know, the black nation of the United States was brought to this country and changed, terrorism has gone on against that section of U.S. society. Whether it's been the lynching that went on for centuries, whether, you know, this is the reality. It's about terrifying a certain section of U.S. society into obedience and compliance. And it's really disgusting. I mean, this kind of violence and repression is kind of built into the United States and has been since the beginning. I mean, this is the reality. The U.S. became the center of the world economy mainly through building itself up on the slave labor and the slaughter of the indigenous people. And this is the whole history of the United States is rooted in racism and repression. And this modern phenomenon, this almost every weekly or monthly occurrence of a police officer murdering a young African-American man and then saying, oh, I thought he had a gun, and then nothing happens to him after he takes a life, after he ruthlessly and intentionally takes a life. That pattern is very much a continuation of what has always been the reality of U.S. society, which is racism, repression, and profits for a small group of billionaires and bankers.
Speaking his mind as always, Caleb Maupin, frequent RT contributor. Thank you for your time.